Now, you're welcome back. Very much appreciate Miguel Delaney of the London Independent making time for us. It's a busy day. Miguel, how you doing? Thanks for the time.
Not too bad, thanks. It's chaotic.
I would presume so. So I think everybody has heard the news at this stage. Manchester City and their 2-year ban is not something they have to worry about. They don't even have to worry about a 1-year ban. They have a €10 million fine. They'll find that down the back of the couch somewhere. This is a resounding result for Manchester City. When did you first hear that this was going to happen? Is this totally unexpected?
No, not completely. I think certainly by this morning, just before it was announced. In fact, in the last week, there had been rumblings that City were newly confident. Really, actually, that goes back 3 weeks, to be honest. And I remember over the weekend, there was a fair bit coming out of Spain. I was actually, funny enough, a Catalan journalist texted me on Saturday, asking me, what's the feel in England? Because we've heard from our side that Guardiola's definitely staying, although that was apparently going to be the case no matter what. And also that the Catalan hierarchy of the club felt confident because the club's lawyers felt confident. So this was beginning to come out more and more. Similarly, about 3 weeks ago, I remember hearing that on the UEFA side, there was some irritation about that they wanted more time to cross-examine. They've been perturbed how some of the proceedings have gone. Now, of course, all of this is kind of second-hand information at the moment, and until we see the written verdicts, we won't fully know. But at the same time, it does feel incredible and quite embarrassing for UEFA that this has ultimately come down to as the CAS verdict put it, some of the accusations not being established, and B, time barring, which essentially means statute of limitations. Now, I was on to someone close to the UEFA situation earlier today, and they maintained that it isn't as embarrassing as that they felt they had their evidence in on time. But obviously, CAS has ruled against them in that regard. And it's, I wouldn't say it's certainly vindication for City. I wouldn't say it's complete exoneration, given that they've had a sanction. There's also a €10 million fine here for obstructing the investigation. I don't think anyone can call that complete exoneration. But they've got their two main objectives, really. They're still in the Champions League. There's no guilty verdict, so there's no reputational damage in that regard, whatever about any of the noise. And for UEFA, it ultimately looks like they can't enforce their own rules.
I had anticipated the discussion this evening being very complicated and a difficult verdict to try and explain and extrapolate from, and I thought we'd be getting very legal and very financial. And then I just couldn't believe it this morning when I saw that effectively a lot of the evidence and a lot of the crimes Man City are accused of are time barred, as you said, statute of limitations, UEFA's own rules here. So, we're saying it doesn't look as embarrassing as it sounds for UEFA. It sounds extremely embarrassing. We're talking about, lawyers, a 20-month saga, how much money spent on this whole thing. And at no stage did anyone go, well, all this fancy stuff that we're doing all here, it actually doesn't matter if we're right, wrong, or somewhere in between, because from a starting point, this case is screwed. We can't actually take this case against them. That's the amazing thing.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it's absolutely remarkable. And especially given, let's be honest, this was a very, very bad-natured case at times. That came in waves, and as we said, there were periods where it was more conciliatory. But right from the start, there were figures in UEFA that really wanted to make an example of City. And to be fair, I think given the Der Spiegel leaks, which are now almost 2 years ago, although I have been told that they didn't include, that UEFA's case wasn't based in the leaks. It was actually about documents submitted to them. But even so, given those leaks, I think there had been a pressure on UEFA to act. Like this didn't just come out of thin air. I think it would have looked very bad if they didn't act on this. And given all of that, and I suppose the existing, I don't know if you call it the fragility of FFP, but there were two previous cases, Paris Saint-Germain and AC Milan, where UEFA weren't able to fully apply their own punishments either. So within that context, they had to do something, but it just ends up with them looking toothless.
They run the game. So, for instance, let's take the learnings from this case, Miguel. Let's sit around as if we're on the UEFA committee. For a start, should we change the time bar rule? You know, should we extend this to anything over the last 20 years? Like, there is no reason, is my point, why UEFA should be toothless. They can set the parameters. Presumably, though, do they need the support of the big clubs? Is that why, you know, in this instance, City were able to get off? Because people are saying this is the death of FFP. And actually, it would look to me, based on what we've seen, as if, well, if the time barring statute of limitations thing wasn't a factor here, then this may have been different. Who knows? I don't know how strongly UEFA were able to prove the issues which were time barred. But, you know, OK, sort that one thing out. This shouldn't be the death of FFP. I mean, that would strike me. This is almost a technicality as opposed to the death of FFP.
Well, I think there's all sorts of angles wrapped up in that. I mean, first of all, you would have thought UEFA might appeal. That doesn't seem to be the case. In fact, their statement this morning was almost plaintive. And I think that reflects a few political tensions in UEFA as well. Because while some figures obviously wanted to really go in this as hard as possible and saw it as representing the future of FFP, there were other figures in UEFA that are delighted to see the back of this case. They felt it was a huge weight and were worried about the potential implications if this ban was upheld and then City went to the Swiss courts, which was possible. Beyond that, of course, whatever about the time barring element, there's also the relationship with the Court of Arbitration for Sport. I mean, only today we had the quote from La Liga president Javier Tebas, who has been very outspoken on Manchester City and PSG. And he was basically saying we have to reassess whether the CAS is the appropriate body to which to appeal institutional decisions in football. Switzerland is a country with a great history of arbitration. The CAS is not up to the standard. Now, to be fair to that, separate from that and whatever about the context of Tebas' own remarks, I was talking to a few kind of legal people today and people who worked on the legal side of sport. And one said basically that this is really the heart of the issue. How can a regulatory body credibly regulate anything when it has now been found that obstructing an investigation is effectively a slap on the wrist? Now, people might say 10 million is a lot more than a slap on the wrist, but for a club of City resources, it's certainly not going to be difficult to find that money. And the other side of that as well is, I mean, the bigger question of this is essentially a huge commercial dispute between a mega corporation that is backed by a state. It's essentially a state-run project and a quasi-state in UEFA. And I mean, there are fair questions whether CES is a body of sufficient size to tackle that. That's just me passing on like some of the arguments that have been made to me today from the legal side. As regards the future of FFP, the case wasn't specifically about FFP, but a lot of people in UEFA saw it as a proxy war about essentially that, and that it was also ultimately going to come down to the enforcement of such rules in future, and also crucially whether owners or the states like Abu Dhabi, like Qatar, would be emboldened by any failure. And I mean, as someone else put to me today, this is essentially driving a truck through the spirit of the rules, getting sanctioned, getting a fine, and yet still not getting a ban from the Champions League.
Yeah, not great. Sometimes it's hard to know what dictates the course of history. A butterfly flaps its wings and all that. But here, I mean, the ramifications here are just seismic. I mean, it's just so much has been dictated today. Like off the bat, if they had been hit with 2 years, let alone one, but certainly two, you would think that's the end of Pep. You would think De Bruyne effectively came out and said that would be the end of him. You would think Sterling might find it very hard to go, and maybe 2 or 3 others. This would have been curtains down on the Man City project for however many years. And yet now we have the complete opposite. I mean, this is now full steam ahead. This is like, the ramifications are just extraordinary. And I read as well, Pep has 150 million as well to bolster his squad in the transfer window. So, man, it's hard to get your head around the scale of this decision.
Oh yeah, completely. There's so many angles to it, and yeah, you're right. I think what City will immediately go out and do this summer is buy an absolutely top class centre half, something that they wouldn't have been able to do maybe had this ban been upheld. And in fact, of course, they might have been able to.
300 million just for the hell of it. Let's get some extra sponsorship money in. Let's do that.
Well, I suppose there'll be some debate about the range of that, and to be fair, FFP as it stands can still mitigate against that. I mean, because that isn't what this case covered. But as regards the future of City, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, had they not been in the Champions League, first of all, a lot of that squad actually now either at their prime or coming into their prime as players, and they're coming into their late 20s. They're not going to want to spend 2 years outside the Champions League. So I think, and I think a lot of the statements from a lot of the players over the last few months have been, pro-City, but yet quite guarded. It almost gave them a get out, if you know what I mean. And I like in the case of someone like De Bruyne, there was a feeling that he might look to move. They weren't in the Champions League. Mm. But of course, it would have gone further than that, because not only will they have those players willing to leave, they would have to replace them. They wouldn't have had the carrot of the Champions League to get players of sufficient quality in, and wouldn't have been able to spend the same money, because I think it's absolutely crucial, and this touches on a wider point in all of this. The Champions League is such a massive revenue stream in the game, probably the key revenue stream, and something that actually distorts the financial balance more than everything else. If you don't get that 50 to 100 million coming in from the Champions League every season, you're in a completely different league. So City would have been denied that at a time, of course, when it was their exact financial operations that were under question. So now, as you say, we've got the complete opposite of that. They're still in the Champions League. They still have that massive carrot, and they're emboldened now to go and improve the squad in the way they wanted, which may well be, but I think definitely a centre-half, maybe someone like Koulibaly for 80, 90 million, probably a left-back and a wing forward as well. And you're kind of changing the complexion of that team. That's very much, I mean, it might seem quaint in the context of some of City's recent summers like 2017, but three big signings are very much an Alex Ferguson refreshment, as he used to constantly do in his big summer, like 1998, say. So that's what we're looking at. And of course, it looks like Pep Guardiola is going to stay for much longer. But so what I think it basically preserves City's status as one of the superpowers in the game with that completely damaged. But because of that, I actually think it also preserves what is a very delicate balance of power in football. Because what really could have caused an absolutely massive earthquake here was if City went to, if City appealed this through the Swiss courts. Then we're really talking about potentially upending FFP or the structures of the game. That could have been, I think that could have much more severe consequences. As it is, people on other sides will be unhappy with this, but I don't think there's going to be great movements against it. And so I think it just keeps things steady for a while, but only for a time. I mean, I do have some sympathy for UEFA's situation in all this, because they're kind of caught in a kind of a multi-angled power battle. On one side, you've got the old money clubs, some of whom were very interested in City being punished. And obviously, many figures within those clubs have been leveraging the threat of a Super League over UEFA to get their way so often. And I think that's maybe been one of the more legitimate concerns City have had. On the other side of that, you've got obviously this new power base, which is basically state-run clubs, those states being from the Middle East. And even there's even greater tensions, greater complications. Because first of all, those clubs, City and PSG, have obviously been involved in discussions for Super Leagues. That's something else that came out in their Spiegel. But as well as that, you've got the even greater tension, which is an economic Cold War in the Gulf. And on one side, Qatar, PSG, on the other side, Abu Dhabi, Manchester City, and maybe Saudi Arabia, Newcastle. And then because of all this money being concentrated in these kind of very small corners of the game, you have this complete distortion of football as we know it, and really an erosion of competitive balance of football. And that's something UEFA have been very conscious of, but have found almost impossible to fight because of the power of these super wealthy clubs. That's both new money and old money. I mean, as an example of that, the European Leagues body, in the last round of negotiations, they were trying to argue that these massive revenue streams that the Champions League brings, that more money from that should go towards clubs and countries not involved in European competition. So it's just to kind of redress the balance a bit. And they wanted solidarity payments increased to 20%. What actually happened was, in the last round of negotiations, solidarity payments went down from just over 8% to just over 7%. And that's because of the power of the big clubs. And I mean, the entire issue of FFP is tied up in all of this and the financial state of the game. And like there's a much bigger context at play here. And I think for the moment, UEFA have just about, actually because of this outcome, they've just about kept this really delicate power balance. But bigger problems haven't gone away. And it still feels that eventually, and I think the COVID crisis will actually maybe push this a bit further down the line, but eventually football is going to have a big reckoning. I don't know what form it's going to take, it could have been a bigger city legal case, but for the moment, I think that's been averted, and really the status quo has been preserved.
Okay, very interesting. Listen, to finish on the story of the weekend, I'm going to do this in reverse because I know you have to run and time is of the essence here. I was going to play a 2-3 minute clip. We'll finish with it instead and let you go, but we were going to play a 2-3 minute clip of Jack on Desert Island Discs in '96, and you referenced it in your piece yesterday in the Sunday Independent, where effectively, as much as the tactics were derided, and you can understand why, there was undoubtedly a method there, and not just a method, but somebody who went to the '86 World Cup and really shrewdly observed what was going on and why his method with this bunch of players was the right way to go. And we'll play the clip after we let you go. But I thought it was a really interesting angle that you touched on in your piece yesterday, and probably something he doesn't get credit for, really. He was never prone to dressing this up with a tactics board and giving it a couple of nice phrases to make it sound very elaborate.
Yeah, in fact, actually, it's well worth your listeners having a good listen to that, because I think it's actually an incredible piece of radio, that. And even the way there's one bit of that show where he almost starts berating Sue when she starts. I think she accuses him of playing kick and rush football. No, Sue. But this is the thing. I mean, it did look crude. It looked basic, but that was a consequence of what was really kind of a really intuitive and sophisticated football mind. I mean, as he pretty much explains in the clip, he just saw the international football was being played one way, which is basically between the two centre halves and no one moving until the number 10 started to dictate play. So, I mean, if you think about how Charlton's looking at that, this is kind of basically spatial perception that you would associate with Pep Guardiola or Marcelo Bielsa. It's just a different way of looking at football. So he didn't see Maradona or Platini or Zico running games in that World Cup. He saw a load of unused space in behind the two defences and thought, right, if we're going to do something different, if we're going to upset the order here, we're going to put the ball into that space. We're going to make defenders turn the way they're not comfortable, and we're going to try and maximise it. And sure, the execution of that was sometimes a bit crude, but I think necessarily so, because Charlton was almost looking at it, and you can hear this in his comments. He was almost looking at it in a mathematical sense. He broke it down and made it simple. I think he said himself, he gave every player just one job. They executed that job, and they'd get results. And of course, that was seen in his attitude. You know, most infamously, we have say the treatment of Liam Brady. But just connected to all of that, there's a great little anecdote in Simon Hart's book, World in Motion, which is all about Italia 90. And there's a bit about John Sheridan. Right? John Sheridan, who was obviously quite a refined player in his own right, loved to play a bit. And in one of his first appearances for Ireland, Charlton just said to him, right, all I want you to do, every time you get the ball, just chip it down the channel. And this wasn't the way Sheridan was used to playing. He did it. He wasn't. I think the story was he wasn't very happy with himself, you know, because he was used to producing. And Charlton, but he did exactly that. Charlton came in afterwards, was absolutely delighted with Sheridan. He'd done his one job. That's how it worked.
So to sum up then, and last point, two things. Charlton and that whole era was a hell of a lot of fun for a country who needed a bit of fun. And secondly, and I suspect we're a similar age, we therefore grew up in a country where soccer was the number one sport, in the sense that everybody stopped and watched the national team. They were the most famous people, or amongst the most famous people in the country. You know, the collective moments like very few other sports people gave us. And crucially, soccer clubs, football clubs popped up around the country outside of the quote-unquote garrison towns. And for us, that was very normal in our teenage years, but that had not been the case, and you can't overstate that.
Oh yeah, I was 6 years old in that World Cup, and I don't really have a memory of football before it. Actually, it's literally my first memory of the game. And yeah, after that, of course, I was hooked. By the following season, like the next September, I was playing in little mini leagues and stuff like that, and kind of on the way to joining my local club. And that was all because of Charlton. And of course, there's a bigger context here. And I was trying to explain that to kind of some English friends over the weekend, and also fellow English journalists. And I don't think they really got just what Charlton's social impact was, because I don't think they kind of realised what the country was like at the time. And it's something I kind of have a vague memory of myself, as I'm sure you do. But I think it was best summed up by Paul Howard at the weekend, which is basically, he tweeted how at that time, before Charlton and that team, Ireland, all you really heard about was economic depression, unemployment, emigration, the Troubles. And then suddenly, in the midst of all that, you have just the pure joy this team brought. Well, that's what it was really about. Whatever about the football, whatever the arguments about the style, they just brought joy. And that's what I just remember about that period above anything else.
Listen, thanks so much. I know we've kept you. Miguel Delaney, London Independent, on a busy day. Thanks, Miguel.
Cheers, lads.
And that clip we're talking about, so Desert Island Discs, this is 1996 territory, and obviously Jack has left the Irish setup at that stage. The whole thing is well worth a listen, as Miguel says. It's really, really good radio. So it's Sue Lawley on Desert Island Discs talking to Jack, and as you'll hear, he gets into his methodology, really.
So, Jack, you were appointed manager of the Republic of Ireland in 1986, and immediately and stubbornly, they say, you imposed your style of what they call kick and rush football on them.
No, people that have said that of us are totally wrong. We had to design a game that would frustrate international teams at a level we wanted to compete at. And I had to come up with a way of playing that would cause them problems. Nobody had ever put the defenders into a position to see if they could play. You know, we always assumed they could play because you get so many numbers back and they can head the ball out, they kick the ball away and they play. But nobody ever really applied what you call pressure. Now, I wanted to apply pressure. I'd seen the World Cup in Mexico, it was at 86. And it was like peas in a pod. Everybody played the same way, threw a playmaker in midfield, and unless the playmaker was in a good position to go with the back four, nobody would commit themselves forward. The team with the best centre midfield player won the World Cup, which was Maradona playing for Argentina. And I thought, we can't enter this fray the way they play.
Because you hadn't got enough good players.
We could get the players to play in a similar type of game, but they've had 10 to 15, 20 years start on playing that game. Now, for us to enter that fray and play that type of game would have been nonsense.
Why? Let's just have it straight. This is because they would be playing with the ball, passing the ball in their own half, which is very dangerous because somebody could come along and shove it in the goal. Right. So
yes.
You want to kick and rush means get it up the field as fast as you can out of danger.
No, definitely not, Sue. Definitely not. That was never the way. Everything was designed. Each player had what they were supposed to do. If we got to the ball to a fullback, what you need to do is you need to pass the long ball to an area where your player knows the ball is going to be delivered. So he is already on his way there before the defender knows where the ball is going.
And it began to work.
And it worked like a charm. We beat Brazil.
But it depended on people playing exactly as you said. You almost, as a manager, want to program players, don't you, to have an instinctive reaction to do what you believe they should
players. Do. In a way, it's unprogrammed players. See, I give each player one individual thing to do. John Aldridge knew that when Dennis Irwin got the ball at right back, that the ball would be knocked in behind the fullback. So John was programmed into going for that. Ray Houghton knew that the moment John got to the ball first, he had to be somebody in front of him.
So there was a set thing for them to do. It does make them into automatons to an extent, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you see, only to a degree into the last third of the play of the park.
Some of your critics in Ireland said that this was a crude way of playing, that you were taking all that wonderful artistic stuff out of the game where people move with the ball.
What is football about?
It's about winning, isn't it?
It's about winning. It's about scoring goals. How you score them and how you go about it is a matter of opinion. Now, they might have had a different opinion to me, but I saw what was necessary for us to get results and to move the team. It amazes me that teams like Milan and many of the European teams now, there's a terminology in European football called pressing. We were doing that in 1986.